Is bigger always better? That was the question on the minds of the Death Star designers when they came up with a new version of the battle station, following the destruction of the first Death Star in the Battle of Yavin. It seemed like an impossibility. A fortress of that size and power should never have been exploded by a single squadron of starfighters. It was utterly unthinkable. And yet, under the torture of the Emperor, the architects had to quickly come up with a second battle station, one much larger and more powerful than even the first. In Legends, it was the architect Pavel who was killed and brought back to life repeatedly by the Emperor in order to make a design without a single flaw in order to fix his first mistake. But though we know that the DS2 orbital battle station was several orders of magnitude larger than the DS1, how much more impressive was the second Death Star really? In reality, had this station been finished, it truly would have been the ultimate power in the universe, and we can justify that. If completed, the second Death Star may have been completely invincible. Students and acolytes, today it is time to open another holocron to learn all of the specifications of the second Death Star, to analyze just how dangerous it really was. The first Death Star, or the DS1, was already impressive enough as it was, considering it was the first of its kind. The first Death Star measured in at 160 kilometers or 100 miles in diameter, making it the largest battle station ever created. For comparison, that makes it well over 10 times larger than the Starforge. Protecting the station, it was 15,000 turbo lasers of various kinds, and 768 tractor beam emplacements. Within the large shell was 357 internal levels, which housed about 369,000 total members of the Empire, as well as the Navy and stormtroopers alike. While these numbers are impressive upon first viewing, the DS1 had several technical flaws which ultimately left it extremely vulnerable. For starters, it was only outfitted with rudimentary shielding because the station needed to divert as much room and power to the super laser as possible. Deflector shields were more of an afterthought when constructing the first Death Star. The Empire was so confident that the turbo lasers would be enough to fend off any attack, as they believed a starfighter offense would be no threat to them at all. If you had asked the creators of the first Death Star, they would have said that it was invincible as well, and had little to no weakness. And yet, there was the thermal exhaust port. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Once the battle station was destroyed, the Emperor was livid. It had taken over 20 years, countless political squirming, and setbacks to make the Death Star 1 happen, and then it was destroyed within its first month of active duty. Sidious wanted to make sure that the second Death Star would have none of the weaknesses of the first, which meant that it had to be bigger, badder, and staggeringly more powerful, starting with the sheer size, compared to the DS1's 160 kilometers. The DS2 was over 900 kilometers in diameter, which is about 560 miles. Pausing here for a moment, there is a lot of discrepancies and misinformation about the actual size of the second Death Star out there. Some resources, such as the Death Star's owner technical manual and a certain source book, claim that the DS2 was about 160 to 200 kilometers. This is actually false, according to the World of Star Wars Trilogy book. In the book, it details the scaling of the station in the actual film itself, as well as takes into account statements made by ILM visual effects designer and legend Richard Edlund. In reality, the second Death Star was well over 900 kilometers. The Empire wanted to make sure that this fortress would be totally impregnable, and that meant outfitting it with armaments that could be considered borderline excessive. The Death Star 2 was outfitted with 109,500 total defense batteries, which included turbo lasers, light and heavy ion cannons, concussive missile launchers, quad laser cannons, and defense towers, to just name a few. Internally, the DS2 contained 560 levels and crewed a whopping 1,844,000, stormtrooper and Navy included. And unlike the first Death Star, it housed a full starfighter complement, which was completely dedicated towards the sole purpose of defense of the weapon. But the size and defensive capabilities weren't really what made the Death Star 2 so impressive. In Legends, the architect Pavel made several advancements to the second battle station. The first of these was the super laser. The Mark I super laser in the first Death Star was powerful, of course, but it took so much power to fire that it required an entire 24-hour recharge period. However, The Mark II super laser in the second Death Star only required a mere 3 minutes. In addition, the DS-1 only had the capabilities to fire on a very large target, such as a planetary body, that being Legends. However, moving on, the more improved superweapon in the DS-2 upgraded with additional lower power weapon fire options, and could target systems that were more suited to fine-tune accuracy. The Death Star 2 had a much easier time destroying cities, if you will. This allowed it to fire on smaller moving targets as well, such as even capital ships. With better power controls and an increased rate of fire, the Death Star 2 was undefeatable in open combat. This efficiency was made possible by the second advancement, which was having 3 hypermatter cores. The first Death Star only had 1, which for those of you who need a refresher, the hypermatter core is basically the central power battery of the station. The Death Star had to share the single hypermatter core between all of its systems, including the super laser, but the DS-2 had 1 core for the station itself and 2 hypermatter cores exclusively for the super laser. That's how much more powerful it was. And finally, the glaring weakness of the first Death Star was removed: the 2-meter wide thermal exhaust port. In its place, the second Death Star had millions of millimeter wide ports located all around the station, doing this to release excess heat and gases. In addition, the new system took advantage of a new highly advanced safeguard that would seal the small exhaust ports in the event of any unexpected excess heat or energy. There is an argument to be made that the original thermal exhaust port wasn't really that much of a weakness though. In reality, there was no one that could have made that shot except for Luke Skywalker in that moment. One of the rebels even tried to do this using his targeting computer, but the payload only impacted the surface. The space was too small for targeting computers, and by most accounts, the shot that Luke pulled off should have been impossible had it not been for the Force. This is also the explanation given in Legends, but this was later changed for Disney canon, as we know that the exhaust port leading to the main reactor was an intentional design weakness placed by Galen Erso, an addition to the lore that I'm actually a fan of. We thought to mention this since there have been many people discussing the first Death Star's weaknesses wasn't actually a design flaw, but rather Luke using the Force. But we'll let you debate that in the comments below, and whether or not the choice made by Disney was a good one or not. We just thought it was worth mentioning. Back to vulnerabilities, the second Death Star was only vulnerable because it was still under construction, and a massive quarter of the station was completely left open. Mon Mothma had received the plans from the Bothan spies revealing the location and schematics of the superstructure, and she managed to coordinate the attack while the window was still open. Of course, this was Palpatine's intention as well, as he wanted to lure the rebellion into a trap. But this was his final mistake, as Palpatine vastly underestimated the abilities of the Rebel Alliance. Had he waited, the completed Death Star 2 would have literally been invincible, and Palpatine would have crushed the rebels, no question. There wouldn't have been a single design flaw, and there was no way to destroy it from the outside. So unfortunately, Palpatine had no one but himself to blame for the failure of the titanic second Death Star. No one left to torture but himself. So tell us, have you wondered how much more powerful the second Death Star was compared to the first? There are some who boil down the second Death Star to simply being a bigger Death Star, but that's a gross oversimplification. In reality, the second battle station was the more advanced piece of weaponry. In fact, it was the most advanced piece of weaponry the galaxy had ever seen, but it never got to see its full potential realized because it was attacked while it was still under construction. But if this video was informative to you, then be sure to comment your thoughts down below. We would love to hear them. What, to you, was the most powerful surprising improvement that you heard? And again, let us know if you agree with the canon change of the exhaust port being an intentional weakness, or if you think that this detracts from Luke's accomplishment. Until next time, my friends, thank you so much for watching the archives today, and may the Force be with you.